the flight that changed aviation forever. The aircraft had just reached cruising altitude. Passengers relaxed. Some watched movies, others slept, and the cabin crew served drinks. It seemed like an ordinary international flight. Then everything changed. Several men suddenly stood up from different rows. One shouted for everyone to stay in their seats while another forced his way toward the cockpit. Panic spread through the cabin. Children cried, people screamed, and flight attendants tried to calm the passengers. The terrorists demanded that the pilots change course and threatened to kill everyone on board if anyone resisted. They claimed they had explosives and warned that any attempt to stop them would end in disaster. The pilots quietly activated the aircraft's hidden hijacking code before the cockpit door was breached. Air traffic controllers immediately realized something was wrong. Military aircraft were scrambled and began tracking the airliner from a distance. Inside the cabin, fear grew with every passing minute. Nobody knew whether they would survive. One passenger, a retired police officer, noticed that the hijackers were becoming distracted while arguing among themselves. He quietly whispered to several nearby passengers and flight attendants. Together, they formed a plan. They waited for the perfect moment. When one of the hijackers walked down the aisle, the group acted instantly. They rushed him, knocked the weapon from his hands, and restrained him. At the same time, other brave passengers fought the remaining attackers. A violent struggle broke out throughout the cabin. Hearing the commotion, the pilot seized the opportunity to lock the reinforced cockpit door and regain full control of the aircraft. The terrorists failed to enter the flight deck. Minutes later, fighter jets escorted the aircraft toward the nearest airport. Emergency vehicles surrounded the runway as the plane landed safely. Police stormed the aircraft within seconds after it stopped. The surviving hijackers were arrested, while the injured passengers received immediate medical treatment. The investigation lasted for months. Authorities discovered that the attack had been carefully planned long before the flight. Thanks to the quick actions of the pilots, the cabin crew, and several courageous passengers, hundreds of lives were saved. This story is inspired by real aircraft hijacking incidents that have occurred throughout aviation history. But the characters and specific events have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes. Passengers were evacuated through multiple exits, while medical personnel immediately assisted anyone who needed help. Many travelers stepped onto the runway overwhelmed with emotion. Some hugged family members waiting inside the terminal, while others simply stood silently, grateful to be alive. Doctors examined passengers for injuries, and crisis counselors offered support to those affected by the traumatic experience. The investigation continued for several months. Authorities carefully reviewed cockpit voice recordings, flight data, communication logs, and witness statements. Investigators concluded that the professionalism of the flight crew, the rapid response of air traffic controllers, and the coordinated efforts of emergency services had prevented a far greater tragedy and saved hundreds of lives. Months later, the captain, flight attendants, air traffic controllers, and emergency responders were recognized for their courage, professionalism, and dedication. Their actions became an important reminder that preparation, teamwork, and calm decision-making can make the difference between disaster and survival during the most difficult situations. This story is inspired by real aviation emergencies that have occurred throughout history. However, The characters, dialogue, and many of the events have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes.